Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung podcast. I'm your host Mark Fraser and I'm joined by Side C and Side D.
Oi, oi. Yep, there we are. We've got to the point that we're just rehashing old ideas, repeating things. We're bloated. Ego-driven, bankrolled.
Fucking hell, man. Like we weren't in episode 1, the Idlewild episode. It was ego-driven from the very start. At least we've been true to ourselves.
Always been present.
Mark, have you been watching much of the Euros?
I've watched a few of the footballs, yeah.
Alright, cards on the table, troops. Since before the tournament, I've had some cash dollar riding on Italy, my beloved Italy, and it's shaping up well. Now, this could play very differently depending on the results by the time this episode drops, because the final's on Sunday. So, let's see how that plays out, because whatever episode comes after that is going to have a very different Chris. You know, the sliding doors effect here.
Yeah.
All right.
As you may know, as you gents may know, but as the general public don't know, I may have gambled 1 or 2 times in my life. So Chris, I'm keen to know what the odds were for Italy when you put the bet on.
I am not a gambler, but I just fancied sticking some cash in them, and I got 8-1, which is pretty tasty given how fucking good they are. But people just didn't seem to rate them. There's a little bit of sort of Anglo-centric arrogance at play as well. They weren't really rated, and then after their first match when they came out flying, the odds were slashed. So yeah, I got a pretty good price on it, and let's hope it pays off, because I will end up on the bookkeepers. And how many people in the world can say they are over the piece up on the bookies? I'll be in that very small group.
2.3 thousand. But that'll do.
And I'm going for a lobster dinner with my very ridiculously Italian flatmate at an Italian restaurant if we do win.
So I do my odds in decimals, so that's 9, and they're currently, when I checked at the weekend, they were 3.5. So yeah, I think you might be on a really good one there, Chris, if they win. So well,
it's the absolute worst case train crash scenario.
It's brilliant, right? Because we are this is going out way after the fact, so it's going to be like a little time.
Well, if England have won, then I have moved to the Maldives or Greenland or something.
Yeah, and if England won and I lost all that money and my Italian dinner, then people have already read about my passing in the papers. Anyway, so this is disc 2 of the double album Mixtape, an idea that seemed like it was too dry to work, and god damn it, we fucking rubbed it until it glowed. So last week we went through a bit of the history of formats. I know that sounds boring, but formats, how they impacted upon the whole notion of double albums, and then some of the kind of standouts, some that we kind of rate or don't rate, and also a wee bit about where double albums stand now because of digital and the fact that, you know, hard copies aren't really a thing. So how do you make a double album if it's all streaming and Spotify? So we did a lot of the kind of backstory to it, and that was kind of interesting, or at least we think it was. And this week we are going to, as is tradition, examine an album chosen by each of us. My album, my double album of choice, is Mellon Collie and Infinite Sadness by Smashing Pumpkins.
You've chosen the obvious one, the easy one, the golden duck upon-st the shitty pond. But fair play.
I don't think a golden duck would float. I don't mean to pick apart your metaphor there, but Dave, what have you gone for?
I've gone for Joni Mitchell with Don Juan's Reckless Daughter.
Please talk to me. Talk to me, Mr. Mystery.
Which I just went for the shits and giggles.
Don Juan's reckless artwork.
Oh yes.
Yes indeed.
Yes indeed.
And Mark?
I went for Husker Du's Zen Arcade.
with a little asterisk next to it after much deliberation and throwing out Prince albums right, left and centre, and the Clash's London Calling and the Minutemen.
It was a shit show, man. The River was in contention at one point, even though I don't even think it's anywhere near Bruce's best album, you know.
Fucking honestly, just getting him to decide on one, we couldn't even start our research until Mark decided on one. It's a nightmare, honestly.
It's like a Fear Factory episode.
Like Dave living in a quantum state of demanufacture and obsolete for like 2 weeks.
Total hitting the grandfather paradox.
We're in a quantum state of England winning the Euros right now as well.
We actually are, yes.
Yeah, I've no idea what's
Euro 2020.
Right. So let's talk about some music on this music podcast. Who wants to go first? We should do rock, paper, scissors, but that can't work 3 ways, can it?
No, I think we should do it in chronological order or reverse chronological order. Either way, I'm in the middle, so.
I think just for being a prick, you should go first, Mark.
Right. Fine. Okay. Maybe that's what I wanted all along, Chris.
He's got me. He's inside my head.
It's the first entry in my notice here. So. Oh well. All right. So Husker Du. If you're even remotely familiar with hardcore punk or punk in general, you've probably heard of Husker Du. Huge influence of so many bands, including bands like Green Day and all that. Really well known. This is probably one of the only punk double records, alongside maybe Minutemen and London Calling with the Clash.
The other ones
Green
you tried
Day,
to pick.
Dos Tres.
I suppose that's a triple record, yeah. But Husker Du contained Grant Hart, Bob Mould and Greg Norton. They were formed in 1979 in St Paul, Minnesota. Do you know who else came from Minnesota, Chris? Dave?
Would that be Prince?
Oh yeah, funny.
The Prince alarm button's wearing out, by the way. We're gonna
you make it.
You're gonna have to get that resoldered. So they were originally called Buddy and the Returnables, I believe, and they had a keyboardist.
Yeah, and they had keyboards called Charlie Pine, and
then they started doing Ramones covers that didn't involve a keyboard. And one day at a show, he got the bump when they did a little set of the Ramones covers, and then he was basically never in the band again.
Yeah, right? Basically. Apparently, they were playing a version of Psycho Killer by Talking Heads, and they couldn't remember the Kiss cassette part, so somebody just said Husker Du.
I like that,
which is quite funny, and that actually speaks to the kind of ridiculousness of the band themselves a little bit. I think their music comes across as being quite serious, but I think their approach to it was never really that serious.
Well, I mean, Husker Du are the progenitors of alternative rock, I mean, I think alongside maybe the Replacements and R.E.M., they were the ones that sort of set the scene for anything that was kind of punkish and melodic, like Nirvana, obviously, the Posies, who have a song called Grant Hart. Weezer, Dinosaur Jr., bands like Veruca Salt, Smashing Pumpkins, for fuck's sake. Foo Fighters, definitely, because Dave Grohl is on the record multiple times saying how big this band was in his youth. They are like the granddaddies of that crossover point.
Yeah, I mean, and on the other side of that coin as well, they're also like one of the progenitors of post-hardcore and emo music as well, in a lot of ways, you know. A lot of emo bands, like we did Lifetime, for example, not too long ago, they did a Husker Du cover. You know, bands of that ilk were really kind of taken by the emotional aspect, I suppose, of Husker Du's sound, of which there is a significant feature of their music. So they released 2 albums in 1981, 82, right? One was a live album called Land Speed Records. Which was our first release, and imagine having the balls of having your first release as being a fucking live album on SST Records of all the fucking places. $300, just record it off the fucking soundboard, and then that's it.
They said they did a lot of amphetamines, and that was basically they explained not only the title but the pace of the music that's on their early stuff.
Yeah. It was very hardcore, and their second album, Everything Falls Apart, is also it's really, really close to like Black Flag or Dead Kennedys, I think. Released in January 1983. It's an okay. I think it's an okay album, to be honest. It's very, very much not what the band would become. You can hear aspects of the sound in Zen Arcade and in New Day Rising, but then after that, it kind of quickly sort of fades away. But
the eponymous title track, the single from that album, was the only real sign of the sort of poppy things they were going to embark upon. And it is really tuneful. It's like much more steadily paced, and the melodies are to the fore. And I mean, it was that record that got them spotted by Greg Ginn, wasn't it? Got them onto SST, who, as we said in the previous episode, was also the home of the Minutemen and their Nichols and the Dime double album.
This album, the EP, Metal Circus, Zen Arcade, New Day Rising, were all produced by a chap who was the SST house producer called Spot, who, let's be honest, is not the best producer in the world.
He's a fucking hack.
Really is not that good. And I think, because you mentioned it in the last episode as well, it's like a lot of the times some of the earlier punk music, like you can't really hear it properly in the way it's meant to be, you know. I think because production's so bad, and a lot of times, and we'll talk about that in a wee second when we get to Zen Arcade. But just to kind of link this particular record, Everything Falls Apart, to the double album concept, there's actually a cover of Donovan on this.
Oh, wow.
Sunshine Superman, track number 6. So it's kind of weird. So yeah,
that Metal Circus EP. I mean, it's an EP, but had 11 songs in it, didn't it? But that was the one that kind of broke them through in that college radio scene. And college radio in the 80s was like the total heyday of alternative music. That was the kind of credible roots of it. I mean, R.E.M., Sonic Youth, Violent Femmes, Replacements, Meat Puppets, all of those bands owed their breakthrough to getting picked up on the college radio scene, and owed their credibility, I guess. But as you say, fucking records up to a certain point, up until like New Day Rising and including, sound like fucking trash. I mean, they sound like demos. I think that definitely forms part of the charm for a lot of people. People who are existing Husker Du fans love that. The guitars somehow sound almost DI'd all the time. I don't know if they were and amped or something like that, but there's a toppy fizziness to them that is just, it's a bit like Territorial Pistons from Nevermind, you know, but that was DI'd for that very reason. They got that exact effect. You know, add a bit of chorus and there you go, that's your sound. But it's really... oh, it's harsh, you know, and there's some really strong songs in it, and you're not asking them all to sound like late era Weezer, but, you know, they definitely could have benefited from a little bit more, what's the phrase, finesse, maybe?
Yeah, and Everything Falls Apart, they're like Sunshine Superman, Sunshine Superman, that's a really hard couple of words to say. That's a really good song. Obviously it's a cover, blah, blah, blah. The first song is great as well. I really like the song itself, Everything Falls Apart. You know, there are good songs in there. After Everything Falls Apart, it would be mostly Grant Hart and Bob Mould to write songs independently of each other, which probably explains why Zen Arcade might be a double album, but we'll talk about that in a wee second. But yeah, Everything Falls Apart is a decent record. You know, Bob Mould on record is saying that that record is fast and furious because it's a result of 18-year-old guys who don't really know how to play instruments very well, just like hammering fuck out of them and try to see what happens. Then, as you said, Chris did Metal Circus, which is kind of seen as being an EP, even though it does have quite a lot of songs on it. Maybe a double EP.
That's a concept we never talked about. The double EP.
The realms of the ridiculous.
Yeah, we're getting there. But you can see them getting a bit more nuanced in Metal Circus, leaning a little bit more towards the power pop, which they would eventually end their career doing. There's some harmonies, if you can call it that, in there. So,
I mean, we'll come back to it in obviously more detail. But when they brought out Zen Arcade, what that really did was it moved them firmly towards what would become known as alternative rock, and away from like this melodic hardcore thing they were doing. That was the album that had the crossover potential to reach other audiences that weren't originally invested in the kind of punk movement. And also it's interesting because, you know, you mentioned about Heart and Mould, and that was the album where they developed really distinct writing styles, you know, with Grant Hart writing the much poppier stuff. It's interesting that they didn't decide to do like an album each, you know, like the Outcast thing, because that probably would have been feasible at that stage, at least to some extent. And it's only their real second album, as much as they had a live record first and then Metal Circus is a glorified album, really. It's like 11 tracks. That's a fucking ballsy move as well. It is a concept album, albeit it's not the first punk concept album. I think that title goes to the album That's Life by Sham 69, by the way. Yeah. And we already mentioned, you know, the Zen Arcade, the influence was massive. We'll talk about it a lot more, but it was provisionally described as the Birds Meet Black Flag by Dave Grohl. The Village Voice in 84 had listed that as number 8 record of the year, directly between Bruce Springsteen and Prince, and that positioning gained the band a lot of traction and kudos and brought them to the attention of the likes of Warner. And a couple of records followed it, and then by 1986 they were releasing Candy Apple Grey on Warner, which was getting them on MTV. You know, it was quite a trajectory in that sense. By the way, for the record, New Day Rising, I think it's my introductory point to Husker Du, and it's probably still my favourite point, but it's fucking harsh as fuck.
Oh yeah.
It's still really, really harsh.
Absolutely. They wanted to produce it themselves, but SST wouldn't let them, and they insisted the Spot did it with them, so it still has that, I guess, signature sound from that guy.
Oh, it's punishing. You know, there's a really, really quite good cover of New Day Rising by Robert Palmer.
You've told me this before.
Yeah, it stands as testament to like the level of influence that the band had across the musical spectrum. But yeah, he released a really faithful cover of it as well. But I mean, they were kind of to some extent criticised / questioned for signing to a major label because they were heroes of the underground, including, by the way, during an interview on the Joan Rivers show, of all things. But way back in like 1983, they'd done an interview with Steve Albini for some sort of zine or publication where they declared like they always intended to try and do something a bit OTT and something a bit different because of their melodic sort of tendencies. They said, look, we don't know what it is yet, but we're going to go in a direction that just is something that you guys don't expect. So if there's an option to do this, we'll take it. And therefore that signing didn't necessarily seem so incongruous. And they weren't the first band to do that. The Replacements signed to Sire, which was like, I think, a subsidiary of Warner in 1985, the year before. But I mean, Husker Du definitely set the tone for what would be like a cascade of these cool alternative bands like R.E.M., Dinosaur Jr., Sonic Youth, Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, Soundgarden, all moving on to majors. Obviously then that set the scene for Nirvana going on to Geffen, thanks to Sonic Youth kind of recommending it, and Nirvana going on to Geffen became like the co-opting of the underground by the majors, you know, and that was a really contentious issue, not least for Cobain. But I mean, Husker Du's trajectory really shaped modern music, and I think that's partly why when you suggest that, I was like, such a fucking good call. They convinced the underground scene that melody and punk were not antithetical, I think. And as you said, they were massive influence in Green Day, especially in the like 2039 and Kerplunk era. You can really hear them. They were a massive influence in the Pixies. You know, Kim Deal basically got her job in the Pixies by answering an advert that name-checked Husker Du. Yeah, and you know, we spoke about it a bit before we started recording, but they were also really crucial in opening the minds of people in the punk and alternative scenes to the LGBT community. You know, because I mean, Bob Mould is openly gay and Grant Hart was bisexual, and I think that was still relatively unusual at that time. And you know, it's a big thing for all these punk kids to suddenly find that their heroes were members of that community, and it really helped normalise it a lot. Because, you know, there was a fair amount of problems with machismo and things like that in the punk scene, especially the hardcore scene.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Apparently, in any of the songs that were sort of love-related, they deliberately avoided gender pronouns, even way back then, to try and sort of universalise the experience. They weren't the first to do that. I think the Buzzcocks were the first that made a point of doing that, but certainly they were one of the first to do that. And as you said, you know, they ended their career doing basically power pop. Bob Mould went on to record under his own name and under Sugar. Copper Blue, the first album by Sugar, is a great example of that.
I said at the start of the first episode that it's weird that we've all picked artists that have done double albums. And the last Husker Du record, which was released in 1987. By the way, can we just stop for a second to say how, like, they were a band for 10 years and they were just releasing an album pretty much every year up until the very end. You know, New Day Rising and Flip Your Wig were both released in 1985. And then Candy Apple Green in 1986, Warehouse, which is our final record, in 1987. Bob Mould says that it was kind of a rough patch for the band, but still a really good record. It's pretty much 50-50 Heart and Mould, so it's essentially two albums in one, if you think about it, and it has a double record as a result. And yeah, I think it's not as good as the other records, but it's still pretty good, and it's got that power pop vibe which they started to bring in.
Yeah, let's really dive into Zen Arcade, because there's kind of quite a lot of things to touch on in it. I mean, straight away, and it's unusual because sometimes, you know, you look at Spotify plays and it tells you a lot about how the audience receives a band. And something I learned today, the opening track on it, written by Bob Mould, that one, is 3 times as many plays as the next most played song. And I mean, 5, 6, 7 times as many plays as most of the other tracks on it. You know, it's way more highly represented than the other stuff on the album, and I don't think it's the best song on it. I mean, it is straight away you get that really buzzy, de-eyed guitar vibe, and Mould's vocal on it is dead full-throated and high energy. It's a very maximal intro.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, it's still got shades of the hardcore punk from the first record, but that's mostly to do with the speed and the kind of feel of the vocals and the bass line. That fuzzy guitar tone takes a lot of getting used to, and it does feel dead lo-fi. This song itself actually predates Zen Arcade as well, and it's a pretty catchy song. I think you know, with good production, I think it could actually be like a really strong contender for being a cracking pop punk song. And it was one of the only 2 songs of the record that wasn't recorded in one take, which is quite interesting. All this album was recorded in over the course of 40 hours. And then it was mixed over the course of one 40-hour session, which must have been absolutely hanging out of that, man.
Jesus, no wonder it sounds the way it sounds.
Yeah, so they had a budget of, like, I think the budget for the record was $3,200, so they basically did it in a week. There's obviously overdubs because there's songs that have got piano and stuff on them, and you know, but pretty much all of it was recorded in one take.
It has some experimental moments in it. Yeah.
There's like weird like tape delay and stuff like that going on. Like, it's not just here's 4 instruments and a microphone.
The second track on it, Broken Home, Broken Heart, is distinctly not a huge departure from their previous work. It sort of bridges a lot.
Your parents fight. You don't know who's wrong or right. Have to put yourself to sleep tonight. Broken Thinking of a broken heart. When the two of them walk apart, it's a broken home, a broken heart.
Whereas by contrast, the third track on it, Never Talking to You Again, which is the first Grant Hart tune on it, is distinctly a huge departure. So you know, you've got one that's quite similar and then one that is completely new direction.
There's things I'd like to phrase somewhere, but I'm never talking to you again. I'm never talking to you again. I'm never talking to you. I'm tired.
Acoustic song, you know. I mean, I will say it, Never Talking to You Again, I think it's a pretty shitty song. Especially
I think it has to answer for Frank Turner.
Yeah, there's a lot of people hold it very dear, you know, and this band have inspired an awful lot of kind of lo-fi, kind of melodic punk and melodic hardcore bands afterwards. I think in context, yes, okay, this was 1984, but there were a lot of very, very good bands doing some sort of vaguely similar things at the same time. So I mean, it's not like the bar was that low. I don't think it holds up in its own right. It's charming, and in context it's an interesting change of direction, but it's not a particularly good song by itself.
It's got a kind of folksy Beatlesy vibe to it. It's just a huge departure. I think it's cool to see them trying. I guess if you're a Husker Du fan at this point, you'll be like, what the fuck is going on here? What is this Beatles bullshit? I don't get it.
But I mean, it's the kind of thing you maybe are more likely to try if you're about to embark on a double album. You know what I mean? If you don't feel so constrained, it might have ended up on the cutting room floor had they not had the luxury of that extended running time, as would the fifth track, Dreams Reoccurring, which, as Dave said, you know, the tape delay, this one's like weird reversed noise, and actually there's a point in it where there's like kind of shivering, wobbling feedback that is so reminiscent of Endless Nameless, the secret track on Nevermind. And I mean, obviously they were huge fans of Husker Du, so I'd imagine they probably took a bit of inspiration from that, to say the least.
I don't want to skip over Chartered Trips, because I think it's a really good indication of the power pop direction that they would later go. It's obviously one of the longer cuts in the record, and I'm saying that it's like, apart from the last song, it's almost 4 minutes long. It's not exactly like it's a really long song, but there's a lot of cool vocal effects that go on it, which kind of pop in occasionally. There's like echo in certain words and all that. I like how the vocals sit quite deep in the mix, and it's got a really cool syncopated outro that kind of just fades out, and again, it's probably a risk you would take in a double record, right? And I think it's probably worth saying, when you said, Chris, that they were talking to Albini about how they were going to try and do something different that wasn't really expected of them, that obviously doing a double album was part of that, right? They wanted to no longer be just a punk rock band. They wanted to try something completely different, and only the Clash had done this before. So I think it's a good indication of not just where they were going to go in terms of songwriting, but also their ambition as a band.
I quite like the sixth track, Indecision Time. It kind of sonically foreshadows Sebado. I mean, especially the earlier Sebado, that really scuzzy stuff, who really did pride themselves in that lo-fi recording style. Other cuts that stand out to me, I mean, maybe Beyond the Threshold. I like the kind of rock and roll, druggy, fuzzy, aggressive kind of slant to that. And I quite like Pride, the ninth track. It's kind of got a gonzo feel to it. It's a bit more experimental, like it's sort of like whacked out 40s into like new territory while still being a punk track. Yeah,
Beyond the Threshold is the start of side B on the LP. I like the twisted and warped vocals on it, and I like how high the bass up is in the mix. And some of the things are quite cool production wise, even if the guitar for the most part just sounds like it's been
maybe by accident, album design. I'll never forget You's Furious. That's one of their most kind of rampaging older school style ones.
Proper hardcore song. They double it up halfway through with the chunky guitar around 1 minute.
So I let you just throw away. Never cared about it. I wanted to be your friend. Knowing others got it. Never cared a thing about.
It's just like getting punched in the face, man. It's pretty cool.
I do kind of feel like it's a wee bit saggy here though, man. I mean, like Masochism World, the 13th track's got some really interesting production on it, and it's a heart mould co-write, which tends to produce some interesting results. Standing by the Sea. His that kind of 3/4 timing. It's obviously a heart song as well, just, you know, purely based on the tunefulness of it. Actually, you were talking about the piano use in it. You know, I really like One Step at a Time. Up in track 16, really experimental, short, but it's actually really nicely done.
Yeah.
You know, it should be a throwaway tune, but it's genuinely really sweet. Like, I think it's a really well realised idea.
There's some backwards guitar on One Step at a Time, which really adds to it as well, I think.
And then, I mean, one of the biggest tracks in Husker Du's catalogue is going to be Pink Turns to Blue, which was surprisingly not a single. Yeah, despite how beloved it is of their fan base.
Yeah, they had no singles for this album at all. It was part of the decision.
I mean, that would have been a good candidate. Although I will say, despite it being really quite tuneful, it's weirdly downbeat, strange. It's got a brilliant wee solo in it as well. Yeah. Like, I love the tone in the solo really, really works. 22, Turning on the News.
That's my favourite song on the album, man.
I can tell though, because I think that's corny and earnest, and that's why you love it. I mean, the sound in that track is one of the worst sounding tracks on the entire record. The recording is fucking horrendous.
I think it's got the best chorus in the album, man. I think that could have been a huge single.
That's because you are a diehard punk.
Yeah,
it is just the one that over eggs the pudding for me, man. It's too punk. It takes itself too seriously, or either that, or it's genius and ironic, and I'm just missing it. And then the final tune is that mammoth 14-minute. I mean, for them, I mean, Husker Du doing a 14-minute track is like any other band doing a 30-minute track. Reoccurring Dreams. Huge sort of like psyche outro full of like chaos and riffs and the big jamboree of fucking mad sonic collages and just them fucking about, and it's kind of pretty effective. I mean, I had it playing in the background in my house earlier on while I was walking about setting up for this, and you know, it's weirdly enjoyable in that context. It doesn't really work if you sit and pay attention to it, because it's fucking mad, but it's got some really catch like things that grab your attention every so often if it's just going on in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the songs you mentioned, I think one of the ones that I really like is The Biggest Lie. I love the bass tone in it. It's really dirty, and it's got a pure doomy intro, which goes into like a really fast early hardcore vibe, which I really, really like. I also like Somewhere. I think that's pretty cool. It feels kind of post-punky almost. It's one of the only songs of the record where most vocals are right up front. It's almost quite catchy, actually. It's got more backwards guitar tracking through it as well, which I think is a really nice touch.
What's interesting though is this whole thing about the narrative that goes through it as a double album. So, you know, in terms of ticking boxes, we referred to things in the first episode. You know, it's not just a long album, it's a long concept album. So in that sense, it's got something in common with the likes of Zappa's album in 66, I think it was 66, Freak Out, where it was like one of the first commercial double albums that had a concept. However, the concept doesn't tie to the double disc format. You know, it's not got that Donovan thing of, you know, like being self-aware of like the A-B, night, day, yin-yang thing. It's a long album with a through narrative that doesn't embrace the double nature of it. I mean, the narrative is, you know, what is it? A punk runs away from home because he's torn between joining the army, joining a cult, or getting a job. He falls in love, falls out of love. But then, denouement, at the end, he wakes up and it was all a dream. The ultimate fucking cop-out ending. Yeah. But I mean, benefit of the doubt, this was early 80s, but that's a shit ending.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like it, man. I think it's a great choice. They're such a fascinating band. They totally deserve their own episode, because they've got so many interesting albums and an interesting trajectory, and their fucking influence is just echoed and continues to do so. So yeah, I mean, I'm into it. I have a horrible feeling it may actually be a better choice than mine. Even though it doesn't embrace its double format, so it's not the patent pending unsung true double concept.
So I was going to say, I guess when it was written, the CD wasn't really a thing, so it was definitely written for the double LP. So yeah, it's weird, because it would only fit as a one CD now, you know.
I find it difficult to get into. Just Husker Du are one of these bands that I'd always heard of and never actually listened to properly, and I just struggled with the production, I guess, and it's very straightforward. And I did enjoy the fact that they tried so much stuff, and I could see how much influence there was there. And I reckon I'll go back to Husker Du and sample them more, and I will probably get more from this record. Just on the few times that I listened to this over the last week or two, it was, when would I actually ever listen to this? Funnily enough, the thing that I noticed was, what we quite often do is you forget what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic, and I wonder if the bands did, because like I heard a lot of Joy Division and stuff in Husker Du, and I also heard quite a lot of Iron Maiden's debut album.
Really?
You know, that like Running Free, the punky stuff from that that Iron Maiden were doing. And I for some reason I just thought it sounds like if the Dead Kennedys were from Greenock. I don't know why. but yeah, I do. I totally get it, and an interesting band.
Yeah, I think it will be potentially the public choice, because everybody hates Billy Corgan.
Yeah.
And Dave doesn't stand a chance. So, talking of which, Dave, do you want to go, or will I?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll keep it short and sweet, because Joni Mitchell, I mean, I think she's got 17, 18 records. She's one of these standalone folk like Bowie or Tom Waits or Nick Cave, Bjork, stuff like that. She's gone through so many different parts of her career. She's been incredibly influential. She's shaped scenes. She's just a really interesting artist, and she's somebody that I'm only just starting to get familiar with. So I mean, I'd really like to get somebody on board who knows a lot more about her to talk about her, and maybe talk about a couple of her properly underrated albums. So I mean, the ones that are classically seen as like her best are normally
Blue.
Within there, but my heart cried out for you, California. Oh, California, coming home. Oh, make me feel good, rock and roll band.
Yeah, Blue and Court and Spark probably.
And your loving, not like you love your freedom.
From what I've heard, I've been giving it a good go over the last couple of years. I think my favourite is The Hissing of Summer Lawns.
Downtown, the dance halls and cafes feel so wild you could break somebody's heart just doing the latest dance craze.
I think that just nails everything that she's still got that folky, poetic thing about her, but just loosening up a little bit, getting a little bit jazzy, getting a bit creative.
That's got the African music
totally,
for the first time, which plays a part in this as well. I mean, I know a wee bit about Joni Mitchell. I know this was her 9th album already. It's definitely an example, going back to her distinctions, of an album that was double on vinyl, but if it'd been made 10 years later, would certainly have been just a single CD.
Well, it's only 60 minutes long.
Yeah, exactly. It's 59 minutes, and there's no apparent specific thematic division. As much as it's quite indulgent, there's no like distinction or particular through narrative on it. But she was born Roberta Joan Anderson. She's Canadian. Her mum's family were Scottish and Irish. Her dad's family were Scandinavian. Interesting bit of information about Joni Mitchell. She started smoking when she was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
There you go, guys.
Smoking is cool.
She has won 9 Grammys. She's still alive. She's 77, I think, just now. One of the things I think is really interesting with Joni Mitchell is she is credited, as far as I'm aware, as a sole producer on her records.
Yeah.
Her debut was Sing to a Seagull.
To the city and lived like old Crusoe on an island of noise in a cobblestone sea.
Was it 1968? I think that came out. Sometimes referred to as an eponymous album.
Yeah.
It was kind of total flower power era, or just at the tail end of that. Our big breakthrough hits probably both came in 1970, Big Yellow Taxi and Woodstock.
I'm gonna camp out on the land and try and get my soul free.
I think Woodstock ended up with like 3 different covers of it being released that same year, including one of them by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And the album the following year, Blue, was rated number 3 best ever albums by anyone ever in Rolling Stone in their poll in 2020. The Hissing of the Summer Lawns came just after she'd made a sort of shift away from folk music towards kind of softer jazz stuff in 1975, along with like a label change that accompanied. A 1976 album that she brought out called Hejira.
Yeah.
I saw a farmhouse burning down in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. We rolled right past that tragedy till we turned into some roadhouse lights where a local band was playing.
Features like the first of her collaborations with a guy called Jaco Pastorius, who was in a band called Weather Report, who then went on to play a massive part in this one. And she felt that album Hejira was distinctly her. Of those different albums, she thought that was one of the truest representations of her, a key album in her catalogue and development. But yeah, then there was this one, which we'll obviously talk about in a wee bit of detail, but just in terms of context, this was like number 25 in the charts. It got kind of mixed reviews. Like bigger publications like Rolling Stone and that kind of panned it, but smaller publications seemed to really, really warm to it. But it never, as an album, despite, she's got 9 Grammys, this never won any awards. It was apparently hearing this record that prompted Charlie Mingus to contact her, and they began working on a joint album, but he died before the completion. And then in 1979 that album was released as Mingus, but it kind of got very lukewarm reviews.
It's short of the hope we have for happiness, bright and sweet. Love is never easy street.
82, she made a big change in direction. Wild Things Run Fast on the Geffen label, where she was basically doing like a sort of like Steely Dan influenced 80s pop rock, which that album included like a collaboration with Lionel Richie and a cover of Unchained Melody, so she was really kind of going for it commercially.
Wild things run fast. In the dark, he could see the trap that was lying in her sweet company.
And then one of the big pivotal points in her career was in 2006. Now she's well into her 60s, and she signed with Starbucks. And released the album Shine. And actually the album got reasonably good reviews, but I think Joni Mitchell signing with Starbucks was contentious, given that she was so involved in the protest movement in the 60s when she came out. I mean, Big Yellow Taxi, for example, paved paradise and put up a parking lot. It was all about anti-corporate stances and things like that. So it was a little bit, it didn't sit particularly well with a lot of people. That album had like a re-recorded version of Big Yellow Taxi on it, which I think also kind of underlined how much her perspective has shifted. It's not a good version of it. For me, personally, I think Joni Mitchell really sums up that sort of era of young women moving to the city from like country areas, and I think her career, as she went from folk to jazz to pop, sort of is a metaphor for people moving from rural America into the cities to try and get jobs during the kind of early 80s boom, and young women, single white female, finding their way in the world, going up the corporate ladder, cafe culture developing, all that kind of stuff. She's very synonymous with that. I mean, she seems like a natural fit for Starbucks. I don't think that was like an accident. There's something soft and, for me, a little bit beige about Joni Mitchell. I understand some of it's beautiful, some of it's lovely. She's got a real touch, like a really personal touch, and she produces her stuff. I get it. But yeah, there's something quite, I don't want to say bland because it's too severe. I don't mean bland in a totally derogatory way, but it's very mild. And it's not something that ever it never got its hooks into me in any way, and I hate Big Yellow Taxi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hate Big Yellow Taxi as well, and I'm not a huge fan of Blue, to be honest. Like, this is not a perfect record, and it's not my favourite, but what I love about it is it introduces you to the other side of Joni. She just fucking goes for it. It's no Yellow Taxi, no folk stuff. It just shows that she is a bit of a mad jazz legend.
Well, God, right for the start, yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. She doesn't fuck around. I mean, the first tune is indulgent for like the first 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, totally. Why
yeah,
not?
like sort of big build, ascension, you know, introduction to the band and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But like in terms, it's also just so breezy. It's like really easy. Funnily enough, I would say this album is literally the exact opposite of Fear Factory. Like, I don't think you could get further away. And man, yeah, I'm sorry about Jacko's fretless bass.
Hang on, there is only... Yeah, I was going to say there's only one caveat to that, which is that Joni Mitchell and Fear Factory both recorded at some point with an upright bass.
Well, I mean, bass is very prominent on this. You've got Jaco Pastorius from Weather Report, and actually a lot of the band on this album are basically most of Weather Report, like ultimate white jazz funk guys. Jaco Pastorius, like genuine fucking musical legend and maniac. And yeah, like the fretless bass does kind of seep through a lot of this record, but it works a lot more than, like, say on Kate Bush's Aerials, because it's an instrument in itself. It's not just like farting in and out.
Man, it's actually a couple of points. It's used really fucking well.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the chords and a couple
of bits of it. Yeah, I couldn't care less. I mean, even Overture Cotton Avenue, the first track, it's a bit too groovy. You know, it's a bit beige and chill, man. And I mean groovy, and kind of like groovy, man. It's a bit too that. It's a bit too light jazz, and you can see that she's moving in that direction. And I don't so much enjoy the use of it in that. But there's periods later on, like the title track, Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, the slide bass motif in that is fucking terrific. It's so totally weird.
I'm Don Juan's reckless daughter. I came out 2 days on your tail. Those 2 bald-headed days in November before the first snowflake sail.
Yeah, it's really, really well used. The second track in it, Talk to Me, the open tuning, I mean, Joni Mitchell's famous for using some interesting guitar tunings. That's kind of interesting, but what the fuck is going on with that chicken bit in the lyrics?
Currency. Come and spend some on me. Shut me up and talk to me. I'm always talking. Chicken squawk. Please talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? There's just she's just
it's experimental,
exploring creativity.
It's a stream of consciousness lyric that she would always do. You know,
yeah, exactly.
I love
absolutely horrible.
I love the thing I like about this record the most is the total improvisational nature of it. There's so many guitars as well. Like, see on Overture,
there's like 6 or 7 or 8 at some point.
Crazy totally. How many overdubs there are on that, but it just makes it sound. It gives it an otherworldly sound, which I really like. You know.
Yeah.
The third one, Jericho.
I said it like I finally found the way to keep the good feelings alive. I said it like it was something to strive for.
I mean, it's kind of shortish, that tune. It's lounge as fuck.
Totally lounge, yeah.
Yeah, very lounge.
It's got some, inverted commas, interesting, that's my euphemism, chord progressions, totally aimed at musos. I mean, Jaco Pastorius is muso catnip anyway, and the chord progressions in that song are right on brand. But really, like, as the track before, the enormous Paprika Plains, it's sort of it's dwarfed. Absolutely. Because this fucking tune comes out of nowhere. I mean, 16 and a half minutes. It was apparently an improvised piano piece that was then sort of retrospectively orchestrated, and actually orchestrated very, very, very well. I guess unavoidably for a piano piece, it kind of meanders quite a bit, but it's sort of impressively realised, despite having some wobbly bits within it. You know, it's reminded me of that track from the Knives album that we spoke about last week.
Yeah,
and it's just this giant centerpiece, indulgent, huge, sprawling fucking thing.
And I guess this is why it's a double album, because this is a side.
Yeah,
you know, this is, you know, this takes up side B, and then you've got to fit, you know, the rest of the album.
Oh yeah, it. You take this one song out and it fits on a single vinyl. Yeah. And so in that sense, it's very indulgent, but it's a bold statement for somebody that was maybe trying to shake her past a bit as, you know, a folk songstress. You know, the singer-songwriter sort of slightly patronising label that's sometimes
the
aimed
fact,
at people.
You know, that Charlie Mingus listened to this and said, "Yes, I want to work with you." Mm-hmm. You know,
absolutely,
kind of absolute approval.
I think there's some of the orchestral work in this is just absolutely gorgeous, man. Like truly gorgeous.
I'm coming back for more.
Given that it was done retroactively is impressive as well.
Yeah, I think it was written by her as well. I think that was scored by her as well. Am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, around 5 minutes when it comes to life, it's just like the pure long drawn out string section. It feels a little bit discordant. It just works so well. And then around about 11 minutes as well, there's just loads of big flourishes. Do you know the whole orchestration of it actually reminded me a little bit of Walker Brothers, what they would do in their early career, you know, with the big
that sort of lush show style sort of And
then they bring in the full band around about 13 minutes, and even though it's just for a brief moment, you actually get some saxophone as well, which is pretty cool.
And then you move on to side 3, Otis Marlena, 10th World, Dreamland.
And the neon mercury vapor stained Miami sky, it's red as meat. It's a cheap.
Yeah, I mean they're a sort of like, they segue out of each other, don't they? And I think the 10th World's interesting. I mean, we'll talk about the cover in a minute. It's maybe in especially bad taste to appropriate sort of African musical sounds in the light of the cover. I mean, there's a lot of guest musicians in this tune as well. Pretty much, as you said, the whole Weather Report. Shaka Khan's, she's in this
World.
one as well.
And Dreamland, I think.
This came almost a decade before the Graceland album by Paul Simon, and
totally.
that whole incorporation of African continent musical influences is putting my serious hat on. It's bold. We already mentioned, the title track, and that the other one that I think stands out to me is Off Night Backstreet, which kind of shows the sort of, I think it's a good marker for that fusion of jazzier, funkier things and her original folk song origins. That song itself takes you on a little bit of a journey of where she'd started and where she was going.
I don't know, loving without trusting, you get frostbite and sunstroke. I wish I felt nothing.
It encapsulates that quite well.
It's like the most additional song on the record, quote unquote. The strings, the horns are really good, and there's like an electric guitar harmonic on it as well, which kind of plays throughout it, which is really good. This is probably the closest thing to a single the album has, and I think it was actually released as a single as well, wasn't it, with Jericho? And
I think so.
It didn't chart.
So I mean,
and then it finishes with Silky Veils of Ardor, which is just sort of acoustic guitar, slow down outro.
Come all you fair and tender schoolgirls.
That track's well named. It sounds the way it sounds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And obviously, we just have to comment on the cover, which is Joni Mitchell in full blackface and curly wig.
Well, there's 3 photographs of her, and one of them, she happens to be in blackface.
Extreme
dressed
blackface.
as her reputed alter ego, a black hipster called Art Nouveau. So,
which was based on a pimp who complimented her in the street once. But she also, in at least one occasion, actually went out to a public appearance, a party or an event, as dressed as Art Nouveau, and therefore photos of Joni Mitchell out in public in blackface.
I mean, it's 1977, you know.
Well, you know, it is 1977 though. I mean, it's not that long ago. But I mean, it is interesting that it just highlights the folly of trying to appraise old artistic gestures by modern standards. You know, we kind of get it that that's not acceptable, but also, are people as understanding of politicians who were going to, like, you know, their student parties in the very late 70s and early 80s in blackface, and now those photos are cropping up? Because I'm sure there's a lot of Joni Mitchell fans out there making excuses for her that are only too happy, and maybe rightly so, to hammer down on top of politicians that get caught at the exact same lark. So I don't know, I'm just interested. I'm devil's advocate there, but I mean, it's definitely not a cover that's aged particularly well. I'd be interested, actually. Is it openly displayed in record shops? Do they have any sort of, like, you know, does Monorail cover it and issue a trigger warning?
No, I don't think so. But I guess looking at it, you wouldn't think, oh, that's Joni Mitchell. You'd just think, oh, it's just got a black person on it.
Yeah, that's Bernard Manning. That's Jim Davidson.
So, but yeah, I mean, like, for me,
that's Pantera.
It's not a perfect record, but it's got moments of, like, fucking some sublime beauty on it. It's the sound of incredible jazz musicians making really nice music. It's challenging, at the same time very beautiful and free. It's the opposite of somebody going mainstream or going pop or going down that bloated route with a double album. It's, fuck it, I'm going mental, I'm going to try my hand at jazz fully, and it works, like, overall. And I mean, if they're not self-indulgent, then they're boring. So I guess it is self-indulgent, but, like, in a purely creative way rather than a ego-driven way. I also think really as a feminist statement, it's like she's a female artist and she's not been forced by, you know, anybody to be a pop star or a pop singer. She's just doing whatever the fuck she wants, and I think that's what was quite narratively powerful for Joni Mitchell in the 70s. You know, this is the time of, like, fucking full prog and, you know, all that masculine shite, and Joni Mitchell's just been like, I'm just going to do whatever the fuck I want.
It's a height of disco as well. It was a height of disco.
Yeah, totally. So it's just a really interesting record, and it's a perfect double album for me because it's double in terms of not fully in concept, but it's a double in terms of it takes 4 sides of vinyl, 15 minutes each. It's an hour long. It's not too long. It's just long enough to be officially a double album. It's not bloated, but it's, you know.
On the flip side of that, literally 50 minutes each, you're constantly having to get up and turn the fucker. That's pretty annoying. Come on, I just sat down and I'm back up again. Anyway,
take that up with the concept of records. You know,
if I had, I know we're a bit short in time, so I'll rush through this, but if I had this for my Nexus, which I don't, I really wanted to highlight, do you know about Morgellons disease?
Oh yeah, that she has.
So Joni Mitchell was very public in saying she had a thing called Morgellons disease or Morgellons disease, which very possibly / probably doesn't actually exist. And it's just an interesting case study in mass psychosis, potentially. It was first diagnosed in the USA in form of 2002, and it's all to do with, like, fibres under, inside and or erupting from unbroken skin or slow healing sores, and like a burning, stinging or itching sensation, plus loads of, like, then very vague kind of side effects and other symptoms, including, like, things that you would commonly associate with Lyme disease, tiredness, all this kind of stuff. Joni Mitchell described cramps and being unable to walk sometimes, unable to wear clothes. She said it was reminiscent of the polio symptoms from her youth and affected the same areas. There was a lot of claims that it was actually a tick-borne infection, whereas most medical professionals in the CDC described it as acute delusional parasitosis, which is where you think you have a kind of parasitic condition, but it's purely psychosomatic. In 2006 there was an explosion in cases of it because of the internet, basically, and it all stemmed for one woman in 2002 called Mary Leto, who was like a homemaker, who a lot of people now think suffer from Munchausen's by proxy, and she used an $8 Radio Shack microscope to diagnose small fibres coming from sores in the inside of her 2-year-old son's lip. And after a whole bunch of doctors said, look, we can't find anything, she published a website about it. I mean, that immediately is a red flag, and that got like 12,000 people immediately were like, I've got this as well. Then the CDC came out and said, this doesn't exist, we can't find any evidence, and she vanished. And for since 2012, nobody's been able to contact her in any way at all. A lot of the people that suffer from it get treated with antipsychotics, but Joni Mitchell is convinced that she suffers from this disease, and so there's a lot of people out there looking for it, even though there doesn't seem to actually be anything to look for. I just think it's a really fascinating case, and her prominence and her talking about it has inevitably led to loads of her acolytes and followers saying, I think I've got that as well. Fascinating, man. People's brains are amazing. And talking about people that might not be the full shilling, my turn to do Smashing Pumpkins. Now I need to flee through this, right, because this band definitely could have a double episode on their own, right? Yeah. Smashing Pumpkins, formed in Chicago in 1988. Billy Corgan had just left a gothic rock band called The Marked.
Now that I feel this way, what more can I do? Now that you feel this way, there's nothing left to do.
He moved to Chicago. He worked in a record store there where he met James Iha. Initially it was just him and James Iha, Corgan on bass, Iha on guitar. They had a drum machine for their first show. They met Darcy Retzky at a Dan Reed Network concert after arguing about a show. She joined. They were offered the concert if they got a drummer. Jimmy Chamberlain, famous Smashing Pumpkins drummer, was originally a jazz player, but he was recommended to Billy Corgan. His style of drumming really influenced the way they developed. Corgan said they were originally playing sad rock, kind of a la The Cure. But Chamberlain's chops and ability and the way he played, the volume he played at, convinced them they needed to go harder. Their first recorded release was part of a compilation called Light Into Dark. Their first single was I Am One in 1990. Their second single was Tristessa and Sub Pop. They signed to a thing called Caroline. They recorded their debut Gish with Butch Vig for about 20 grand in 1991, and this is a key moment because Billy Corgan reportedly played almost every instrument on the album apart from drums, and that immediately caused tension, clearly. The band at this point kind of drew comparisons with Jane's Addiction. I don't particularly like Gish. I remember buying it on vinyl and then getting it to fuck pretty quickly. They released an EP called Lull, which actually is pretty uncommon. That same year, then they signed to Virgin Records. They toured the Guns N' Roses, Jane's Addiction, Red Hot Chili Peppers, big fucking shows. But during that tour, James Iha and Retzky separated, and Jimmy Chamberlain became hooked on drink and drugs because one wasn't bad enough. In the early 90s grunge explosion, Smashing Pumpkins got really lumped in with that. They initially were called the next Jane's Addiction, then they were the next Nirvana, then they were the next Pearl Jam, which Billy Corgan's observed. And I think the album I've picked, Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness, was a big attempt by him to sort of distance themselves from most of those references, really, as much as anything. They went down to Georgia in 92 to record the famous Siamese Dream album, also with Butch Vig. The decision to go to Georgia was mainly to get Jimmy Chamberlain away from all his drug contacts, but inevitably he found new ones. Again, Billy Corgan ended up recording the vast majority of the instruments on it, which again led to animosity and kind of solidified this image of him as a bit of a tyrant in the popular press. That started to become the narrative. The album took about 4 months and 250 grand to make. Siamese Dream debuted at number 10, ended up selling 4 million copies in the US. Cherub Rock was them sort of like musing on the fact that loads of folk hated them. Disarm, big single. I fucking hate it. It's totally overblown, and it's one of the most frustratingly annoying, grating examples of Billy Corgan's voice. It was actually banned in the UK as well because of the lyrics. Couldn't be played on radio here. Today, big famous single for them. MTV put it in heavy rotation with the only other video, an ice cream van apart from Cold Chamber. Rocket was the fourth single in that album, reached number 4 in the UK overall. As I said, the alternative scene didn't like them. The band Pavement had written a song about them called Range Life that mocked them. Bob Mould had called them the Grunge Monkeys. Steve Albini had ripped them in the press, calling them by, of and for the mainstream,
and compared them to REO Speedwagon.
Yeah, that's right. Mellon Collie came out in 95. We'll talk about that in a second. 1996, during the tour for that album, Jonathan Melvoin, who, by the way, Mark Melvoin,
yeah,
are really wearing out the Prince buzzer.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know exactly who he is.
Brother of Wendy Melvoin from The Revolution. Died after overdosing with Jimmy Chamberlin, and Jimmy Chamberlin, as well as having to get over his overdose, was arrested for possession of heroin and fired from the band. And at the end of 96, Corgan went on record saying rock music was dead. James Ehak concurred and said the future would be electronic. 1997, they contributed to a couple of film soundtracks. I went on the Lost Highway soundtrack, and The End is the Beginning is the End was Grammy nominated, and it went along with that terrible Batman and Robin film, but actually not too bad a song. Adore came out in 1998, where the band did indeed go more electronic, almost industrial. The darker image as well, like the shaved heads and black leather and stuff.
You'll be a mother to my child, and a child to my heart. We must never be apart. We must never be.
The Adore album really didn't sell well though in the USA. It did better overseas, but the sales figures in the States were really underwhelming, and that's really important in the context of double albums. By the way, credit where it's due, Smashing Pumpkins donated all ticket revenue from the entire Adore world tour to charity, which was near enough $3 million.
That's cool.
Yeah. In 1999, Jimmy Chamberlin was brought back in, much to people's shock, but Darcy Retzky, inverted commas, left just prior to the Machines of God album. Now, the Machines of God album was meant to be a double album, but the record label said no fucking way, based on the sales of Adore, which kind of underlines what we said way back in disc 1 of this mixtape. Double discs have certain advantages. You can boost the price, you can get double unit sales, but also they cost more to manufacture, and if you don't shift them, you're out of pocket.
They cost more to buy as well.
Yeah, so it puts people off.
Exactly. The casual consumer is less likely to purchase.
There's all kinds of things as well. Like if the casing isn't a normal jewel case, it creates loads of problems for things like people storing them in their houses and that. There's tons of stuff to do with that and how that affects the retail. Anyway, that album, Machines of God, it's not amazing, but it does have a pretty good single on it called Stand Inside Your Love.
Yeah, that was the first Smashing Pumpkins record I bought, actually. I'd had a copy of Mellon Collie on CDR, but then I bought that record and I was really excited because I think I'd heard that song.
It's a good song.
There's like another really sort of grungy heavy one on it, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get into this. And then Oh, it's actually quite a boring record.
Pretty naff, yeah. In 2000, Billy Corgan actually announced the intention to split the band up at the end of that year. They released Machina 2 / Friends and Enemies of Modern Music. That was released on 25 vinyls that were given out to friends of the band, and they were given instructions to distribute it for free on the internet, and which they did. After that point, there's really not a lot positive to discuss about Smashing Pumpkins. They released a collection called Rotten Apples. They formed Zwan, which was a big shrug. Corgan tried a huge concept project called Tear Garden by Kaleidoscope. They put out Oceania, which was sort of an album within an album based on that.
And some EPs as well.
Great unknowns, I stumble brightly into gold, reckless yet.
Monuments to Energy is also part of that, supposed to be as well. Yeah, it's just aye.
There was a bunch of reissues in 2014, including Pisces Iscariot and Aeroplane Flies High, which actually are not too bad. They got some good moments from the earlier era. Tommy Lee from Motley Crue joined in drums at one point, believe it or not.
Aye, from Monuments to Energy, he played drums on that record. Yeah,
and then Brad Wilkes from Rage Against the Machine filled in. So did the bassist for the Killers. So at this point, they're just this overblown fucking hard rock cafe bullshit. The Monuments to an Elegy album released, and honestly I've never really heard it. 2 more albums came out, Shiny and Oh So Bright, and an album called Sir.
Fragments on the mind, shadows hold the mist, fraction ends this wish.
In 2020, don't know much about them, to be honest. They reformed. One thing that really caught the public's attention was when the band reformed in 2018 and didn't invite Darcy Retzky. That led to like a very public airing of grievances. I think they published a letter that she'd written to the band, or an open letter to the band, and basically, reignited that whole Corgan as a cunt conversation. Billy Corgan also found time to start a wrestling franchise. In 2011, he started Resistance Pro, based in Chicago. Then he took over TNA in 2016 as a head writer, chief writer. 2017 he bought NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, and he managed to appear on InfoWars in 2016 comparing Bernie Sanders to Chairman Mao, and more or less kind of came out and supported Donald Trump. And he went on Howard Stern's show, which we've spoken about in this programme before, describing how in LA he once had sex with a famous female celebrity, and he says he literally saw her shapeshift into her true reptilian form mid-coitus, although he didn't say who she was, but he says the reptiles are real.
Billy, no. Nah. By the way, just on the point of the last record, right? Do you know that's technically, if it was released back in the old days, it would be a double album. It's 72 minutes long, and it's a synth pop album.
I've listened to bits of it, and it's like a joke. And
it was accompanied by a 5-part animated series called In Ashes. So Billy Corgan's still fucking a full-on melt, it would appear.
So I mean, Mellon Collie and Infinite Sadness, I'll skim through it. Like, Corgan called that the wall for Generation X, and he's kind of got sort of a point. He'd written 56 songs for the sessions around it. The album ended up being 28 songs asterisk over 2 hours. One of the key songs on it, 1979, was actually originally rejected by the producer, Flood, until Corgan had gone away and sort of worked on it and brought it back in its full form. Interestingly, we'll come back to this, but the vinyl version was 3 records and had 2 extra songs and a completely different track listing. The concept was supposedly a song cycle intended to reflect birth, life and death. It debuted at number 1 in the Billboard Top 200. Yes, it's the best-selling double album of the 90s. Yes, it's 7 Grammy nominations. Yes, it's definitely not Unsung. I mean, I think that format thing's really interesting because the cassette and the CD are split into 2. They're split into Dawn to Dusk and Twilight to Starlight, which Unsung, pending true double format concept on the button, right? However, caveat, the vinyl is 3 LPs, it's 6 sides: Dawn, Tea Time, which is a terrible one, Dusk, Twilight, Midnight and Starlight. But the vinyl also features 2 extra tracks, Infinite Sadness and Tonight Reprise, which I wasn't familiar with actually. the track listing is totally different, and this for me throws the whole concept thing under the bus. Zero moves from track 4 on the CD to halfway through side 5 on the LPs. Meanwhile, Through the Eyes of Ruby goes from effectively track 21 in the CD back to track 2 on side 3 of the records. And that just kind of makes a mockery of the notion that these were written with any concept in mind. And what it really seems to suggest is that all this was just retrofitted, and that Billy Corgan and Smashing Pumpkins are indeed full of pompous shit, and that he might just be a balloon and a charlatan after all. Because I was really invested in the double record concept thing, and it felt really considered, and I could see the flow. But finding it was totally jiggled about like that, and then tried.
But you can still, it can still be shaped for that format originally, and they actually thought about it and said, yes, that's right. And then they can still have gone, oh, do you know what? Maybe it's been, however long until the vinyl release. Maybe we can fiddle about with it and give people a little change to the story, as it were, for the vinyl. I don't think it negates your, joy from the 90s.
I don't know, man. I think he wrote 56 songs for it, and then he had also said that James Iha wrote a bunch of songs which basically end up as being B-sides for most of the singles and stuff like that. I mean, the 2012 reissue that's on Spotify is 6 hours fucking long, and the vinyl version of the record, which was released in 2012, was the original version. It's basically the CD version on vinyl.
Yeah, I'm the one that brought this to the table, and I'm willing to admit that doesn't sit well with me, and that's why I said way back, Mark, I kind of feel like Husker Du might actually be my vote, just because I'm really disillusioned with the fact that they tried to they tried to do that, because I really thought this ticked all the boxes. I really thought it was long, but it was a concept album that took on board its own duality, and in fact no, it's just a fuckload of songs that they tried to fob off as some kind of overarching premise, and no, there wasn't an overarching premise. It can't flow because it's all mixed up. I mean, that all said, it's a fucking incredible collection of songs. I mean, I stand by that. I think I don't listen to much Smashing Pumpkins, certainly not afterwards, and not even before it. I don't like Siamese Dream. I certainly don't like Gish. Some of the B-side stuff's alright, but I mean, Mellon Collie is a beautiful, subtle intro to the record. It's really, really interesting. Tonight was a big, bold, pompous anthem. Jelly Baby, Zero, Bullet with Butterfly Wings are excellent, iconic slices of alt-rock at its peak. And I also think the track Muzzle, which is near the end of disc 1 on the CD version, is as good as any of them. I think it's a tremendous tune.
It was actually supposed to be a single.
Can I just want to come in and say on Muzzle though, give Billy Corgan a Manchester accent and it could be on Definitely Maybe by Oasis. I also, much like Husker Du, it's interesting to go to this and think, oh, what are the UK references, because we only ever think of the US references, and there's quite a lot of cranberries in the Smashing Pumpkins.
Shut up.
No, there fucking is. And then I checked, I was like, what's that song that's like
you're right.
It came out 2 years before this. Right. Cranberries were before the Smashing Pumpkins, which I was intrigued by. So
yeah, but the thing is, like, Smashing Pumpkins have huge big servants of 70s rock, like loads of Sabbath, loads of Deep Purple.
Totally. And they're pretty much, and he said it as well, they're pretty much a US take on The Cure, just that big gothic romantic sad thing, and just trying lots of shit out.
I mean, they embraced the kind of Pink Floyd 70s prog era in a big way with tracks like Galapagos and Porcelina. they're big monsters. They have their moments. They're not great. I think Love on that first disc is another totally underrated, sneering, scuzzy
I like Love.
masterpiece.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tremendous tune.
Like that chorus could be on a whole record, funnily enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wonder why that is. Disc 2 of that, Where Boys Fear to Tread and Bodies, are terrific alt rock. I love Bodies. I think it's a great song. .33 is a blissful, kind of trippy, psychedelic, kind of sort of like Jane's Addiction, but done better. And I think that's where the Cranberries thing's maybe really relevant as a reference as well. Yeah, I think the album enters a kind of nice lull at that point. In the Arms of Sleep's really nice. And then it kind of starts to come out of that with that Generation X Slacker Anthem 1979, which is just brilliantly judged lyrically as well. It just sums up a whole era, that kind of like pre-Beck suburban kids sort of Douglas Copeland vibe, man. It's brilliant at that. Tales of a Scorched Earth snaps things back to life, the overdriven vocals and that. It's probably the album's heaviest moment. Although XYU tries really hard to match it with that, and in the eyes of the devil I see God. But I mean, it highlights how ferociously heavy they can get, especially when they slowed that track down. I mean, they are a fucking rock band. They got some really big riffs. Through the Eyes of Ruby, I think, is one of their best tunes. It's fantastic. A better written, catchier equivalent to like Poor Selena. And then the final part of the album is just this really sort of much more subdued, almost, it kind of bobs between somber and quite whimsical at points. You've got like Stumbling, which is quite melancholy, but then Lily, We Only Come Out at Night, Beautiful, are all pretty upbeat and sort of like cheeky.
We only come out at night. The days are much too bright. We only come out at night.
And it does it's meant to represent old age and death, I suppose, although we don't know how accurate that actually is given the reshuffle. But I don't think any of those later songs are entirely interchangeable or disposable. I think the album has an abundance of really, really good songwriting in it. And I think, to sum it up, regardless of the wider context of Billy Corgan and the band, it's a remarkable feat to write this many strong songs in one sitting for one release. I think it's a double album that kind of absolutely rewards with repeated listens, like for years, partly due to the sheer volume of material that's on it, but also because I think the tracks like Bullet with Butterfly Wings and Tonight Tonight, they didn't really last that well because they were kind of very off their time or overplayed. But the album tracks like Through the Eyes of Ruby, Love and Muzzle and stuff, they really have a lot of longevity to them. I find I still really enjoy them, and honestly, just credit where it's due, this band fucking rocked when they wanted to. Billy Corgan is a zoomer with a hellish voice, but they really could riff, and this album has some fucking chunky moments on it.
Oh yeah, some of the riffs on this record are fucking incredible, man. There are so many like 80s guitar heroics on this shit. It's unbelievable, right? The
tones, I mean, Josh Homme is very famous for his guitar tones, but Billy Corgan is a pioneer of awesome guitar tones, especially for solos. where they just rip out of the speakers. I mean, he was a fucking maestro.
Although I think some of the bigger
And James
tones
Eager.
on this do owe quite a lot to Kim and Soundgarden. Like, it's got that doomy
sure.
sludge to it, like very like fuzzy. Props to him though, like it is good.
There's a lot of grunge moments on this album for sure, man, and those grunge moments remind me of Soundgarden more than anything else. Or Melvins as well, actually. There's like when they go slower and doomier, it sounds a lot like the Melvins.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fucking great record. It's huge melodies, huge songs, and it works because it's pompous and overblown, and it's like egoist and it's ridiculous. And like, I really like that it exists, and it's like a 90s sweet spot for indulgence, but romanticism as well. And it's fucking great. Is this our first diamond record though? I think this is the best selling album we've talked about.
I think you're probably right.
Wow.
But
more than Prince?
Well, the only one we did was Parade, and it wasn't the biggest seller, so
Jinx. Well, I mean, I told you I was trying to caveat it way at the start that the concept was out the window. But I mean, I think it's one of the best examples of a double album. Quite simply, I think it's way more consistent than most, even some of the legendary ones.
I think it's like a touchstone. It's like if you say to a fan of alternative rock or heavy music or anything, what's a good double album? They'll go, oh, well, Mellon Collie, obviously. Like it's pretty much the first one off the tongue for, most people.
Yep.
And it's earned that.
Cool.
Well, there's a vampire.
How the vampire? There's some way more annoying vocal samples in that, Mark.
Oh yes.
How can people vote in this?
Go to our website, unsungpod.net, and you can vote there.
Because it's a 3-choicer, you can't do it on Facebook.
3-choicer, you can't do it on Facebook. Yep. So if you care enough to want to vote, then go and do that.
Okay, cool.
So this brings us to a Nexus.
A complicated series of connections between different things.
Yeah. Obviously, we're going down different paths because we all do it for the album that we chose. So
Indeed.
There's no chance of crossover.
I'll go first.
Yeah, let's do it as we did the records. First off, who are we getting to and who chose it?
Well, Cat Allies, our Canadian connection, chose Lassie, the Wonder Dog.
Okay.
Mark.
So Bob Mould from Husker Du, was a booker and writer for World Championship Wrestling in 1999. WCW Wrestling, he was.
That's mad.
That's
Holy
crazy,
shit.
right?
And that's a link to Smashing Pumpkins as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go that route, but...
And of course, Joni Mitchell was in the Legion of Doom, so...
but no, like Bob's on record, he's been a huge wrestling fan and has been since like the very early days of Husker Du, when he was talking about like the interviews and all that, which is pretty cool. But he fell away from being a writer because it was like the craziest time in WCW at that point, and he found that writing for a 3-hour show was just
late 90s.
Yeah,
that's when I was watching it. That was when I was getting home from school with chips and cheese, watching Robot Wars and then WCW with Hollywood Hogan.
That was the ratings wars as well, wasn't it?
So 1999 was just after they'd lost to the WWE, so it was like the throw every fucking thing at the wall you can and see what sticks. It was just the craziness. And one of the reasons he fell away from it was because he just got bored of sitting in and trying to write a 3-hour show. So he was like, I can't really do this anymore. But apparently, right, he used to hang out with Kevin Nash and like go for drinks with him and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. I just want to take a wee second here to say that in the 90s and I guess the 2000s as well, maybe not so much anymore, but these are big beefy lads who are, kind of known for being a little bit homophobic,
They are big beefy guys, yeah.
Kevin Nash is pretty cool, and obviously Bob Mould's sexuality was known at that time, so I think it's kind of cool to see him doing this really super macho stuff and being accepted in an environment where I'm pretty sure a lot of other people were probably not accepted. At the time that he was a writer for WCW, there was obviously quite a few heavyweight champions, one of them obviously being Bret the Hitman Hart. He was a champion. He was involved in a feud with Goldberg, which somehow, because of booking and poor writing, he ended up being in a tag team with Goldberg as well, and they won a tag team championship. And they held the tag titles for a bit, and then they lost them to the Outsiders, which was the team that featured Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And then not long afterwards, he actually fought Goldberg and was injured, or was concussed so badly by Goldberg that it ended his career, essentially. And he lost the title and was very, very angry at Bill ever since. In 1997, Bret Hart was on an episode of The Simpsons called The Old Man and Lisa. In this episode, Burns loses his fortune and he turns to Lisa for help. Turns out that Burns' money was lost because he made a lot of bad investments and they've totally ruined him financially, and the bank sells his house to Bret the Hitman Hart.
I remember.
That episode was episode 21 of season 8 of the show. Episode 20 of season 8 of the show featured Lassie. Lassie actually cameoed as a dog called Laddie, and it's a dog that Bart buys with a credit card, which he created using Santa's Little Helper as a fake name to get the card from. And the card, and the people at the card company end up misnaming Santa's Little Helper as Santos El Halper, and the card.
Fucking brilliant episode.
Yeah, it's a great episode.
Great era.
So yeah,
just on the verge of it getting shit.
Yeah.
Oh no. 8, 9 and 10 were terrific seasons. Really good.
So yeah, there you go.
Hi, Dave.
Well, I've done a mark and I've kept it supremely short. We did a movie soundtrack special a wee while back, and we talked about needle drops. When a song comes into a movie and it's, a vital part of the emotional story or the narrative. And Both Sides Now is a key needle drop in, can you tell me, lads? Love Actually. When Emma Thompson thinks she's going to be getting a nice bit of jewellery from her husband, is it Alan Rickman? But then he just gets her a Joni Mitchell CD because he's actually thinking of giving the jewellery to his attractive young secretary. And so she sits in her bedroom and cries, and it's very emotional. And everybody feels sorry for Emma Thompson, and Joni Mitchell is the perfect bit in that. Love Actually also features Bill Nye as Billy Mack, the sort of weird 70s rocker who does the Christmas stupid song, and features Gregor Fisher as his long-suffering manager, Gregor Fisher, aka Rab C. Nesbitt. In 2005, he appeared in a film along with such other British acting heavyweights as Peter O'Toole, Samantha Morton, also Peter Dinklage, and that film was called Lassie, a 2005 British version of Lassie, and by all accounts it was crap.
Yeah.
Shitting hell
indeed.
But yeah, Rab C. Nesbitt was in Lassie.
Alright, Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh, wait. A video game was released in 2005 on the PlayStation 2 and was negatively received.
It was, yes.
Well, who would have thought that?
Alright, Smashing Pumpkins features Billy Corgan. Billy Corgan has a few interesting bits of trivia to his name. He owns a 1930s themed tea house in Illinois.
Of course he does.
He also played alongside Wayne Static in their first band in 1987-88.
Of course he did.
Do you know the word smashing in Smashing Pumpkins actually means great, not breaking.
Oh, okay.
As in the Smashing Pumpkins.
The great pumpkins.
Interesting.
Yeah. But one of the other things with Billy Corgan is that he loves a fucking beef. He loves a beef. So some of the people,
as in big beefy boys.
Yeah, I know.
No, the other kind of beef, the only other kind of beef. He had a beef with Courtney Love, despite being exes, when she engaged in the unauthorised use of a couple of co-written numbers on her album Nobody's Daughter, which he took exception to. He had a beef with Marilyn Manson after Marilyn Manson told him that he should release skull caps and yellow t-shirts with zigzags on them because he looked like Charlie Brown.
I mean, that is pretty good, actually.
He had a beef with Chris Cornell who said that the Pumpkins reunion without Darcy and Iha wasn't legit. He had beef with Radiohead because he said they were pompous, which is fucking rich. He had the beef with Deer Hunter, what's his name, Bradford Cox, after Deer Hunter supported Pumpkins on tour, and there was something to do with like Deer Hunter took a bottle of water out of like a big stack of bottles of water. A huge bodyguard huckled him aside. Billy Corgan was waiting on stage for him the next day in a chair that had been placed strategically on the stage, and Pure went from like, who the fuck do you think you are? You're nothing. You're shitting my shoe. I'm Billy Corgan. You're supporting Smashing Pumpkins. Corgan, by the way, denies all of this. Deer Hunter says he ripped off his pass and stuck it to Billy Corgan's leg, and then Billy Corgan tried to sue him for assault. He denies all that anyway, but surely his biggest, most notorious beef is with a Scottish wrestler called Grado, which took place at Impact Wrestling. After Grado signed to the company, Billy Corgan was his new boss effectively, and Grado said, Smells Like Teen Spirit was a cracking tune, nice one. Anyway, Grado, total character, does a bunch of stuff well known here. His entry music when he was part of ICW, Insane Championship Wrestling, was Like a Prayer by Madonna, and it was absolutely fucking outstanding. What an entrance this guy had. I've seen it in the flesh. It's absolutely brilliant. Everybody's singing along. Anyway, Madonna performed at the 2006 Grammys with Gorillaz. Gorillaz had the track called Clint Eastwood, obviously named after the actor Clint Eastwood, that also featured multiple samples of the theme tune of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. The most successful version of the theme tune from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly was not in fact the original, but a version by Hugo Montenegro that came out the same year and charted at number 2. That version featured a whistler, a professional whistler called Muzzy Marcellino. The original, as it happens, was whistled by a man called John O'Neill, who also did backing whistles and arrangements on I Am the Walrus. Anyway, Muzzy Marcellino was also famous for having whistled the whistling theme, which was the iconic opening music to the TV series Lassie.
Starring June Lockhart, Hugh Riley, John Provost as Timmy, and, of course, Lassie.
Albeit not introduced until the 5th series, but it went on to become the most famous associated music.
Good fucking work. Good work.
Powerful.
Good work.
Yeah. Now, we're going to keep next week a secret, mainly because we haven't decided.
Yep.
But what we are going to do is we're going to do a special episode soon, and it's going to be another Sound as a Pound, where the three of us went out like minks to the pound shop at the middle of a pandemic, which is the least sanitary place in the entire fucking planet, beyond wet markets in Wuhan, and we bought each other gifts, which were CDs in their £1 range, hence Sound as a Pound. So we are going to do 2 episodes where we each do one each of the gifts that were given us by our fellow hosts, and right now we're going to unbag them. Mark, do you want to go first?
Yeah, let me just. This has got some really amazing rapping on it, so I'm just.
So I've got to do one from each of you. Okay, here.
Just going to take this off without looking at the other thing in the rapping.
Yeah, Dave is a great rapper.
Yeah, he's a good MC. So I have A Grand Don't Come for Free by The Streets, which is from Weaver.
That's a lovely.
Oh yeah, because it's that's because it's hip hop, rap, poetry.
Doesn't even have a cover. Weaver
Doesn't have a cover.
Weaver, did you keep
fucking pound, mate?
No, wait a minute. Mark, Weaver took the cover out, sold it on eBay for £1 to somebody to make his money back. That's what it is.
Do you know what's really funny, right? It's like, I almost got Weaver this fucking album.
I wonder if that's going to happen. Alright, my one from Weaver is Bush's razor blade suitcase.
Yes.
an album I don't even need to listen to do the episode because I know it inside out.
All right, okay, so who did the wrapping paper? That's
Me.
Chris.
That's
Mark. All right, I'll do that.
I can't remember what I got you.
Oh my god. Plan B. The defamation of Strickland Banks. Holy fuck.
It's hip hop, mate.
So we've gone down the same route here, but I mean, well, Plan B. Jesus Christ.
All right, I've got Chris's package here. This trailer by Ash.
I took
Interesting.
pity on you. I got your record that I know you don't own and that I'm convinced you'll like.
I don't like Ash at all.
I bet you like that album.
Cool.
Which one's that? What's it got on it?
Trailer's the
Trailer?
first one.
The first one,
Uncle
aye.
Pat.
It's got
all that kind of stuff.
It's got petrol on it. Yeah. Jack names the planet.
Right, Chris, you better open another one, no?
This is from Mark. It's going to be stinking. I know it for a fact.
Oh yeah.
Oh, fuck's sake. Crash test dummies. Go and shuffle this sheet.
Yeah, sorry.
Dave?
Chris, you really outdone yourself here.
Have I?
Fucking hell. Ocean colour scene. Mosley Shoals. Oh my god.
Oh, it's top loader level.
Fuck you, Christopher.
One apiece.
I thought the point was that you could buy good records in pound shop, no?
Possibly, but that's not what we're looking at right now.
Oh wait, I bought you Bush, didn't I?
Yeah, but but what we'll do is we will do 2 Sound as a Pound episodes where we do one each, so it'll be 3 records per episode, and they will be available to subs. Well, non-subs, get yourself over to our Patreon, go for the minimum donation, and you will get access to us either loving or hating, probably hating everything that just came out of a parcel.
Before we depart, do you want to pick a nexus for the next mystery episode?
Next episode, whatever we decide on, will be nexusing its way to Vicky the Viking by VJ.
Vicky the Viking by Vicky.
Okay, great. We can do that.
Alright, wow.
Alright,
Mammoth.
well, it's been a pleasure.
See you on the other side of the Euros, jaded as we might be.
Chris, I know what's happened and you don't.
As do I.
I don't. Alright, I'm not even looking at the screens. Just get the fuck.
Alright, everybody. Cheery bye.
Bye.